Thank you, Emily, for the very kind introduction, and of course for inviting me, and thank you, Thomas, as well, and for your great talk earlier on. So I guess I wanted to start with a few overarching ideas and themes for what I want to talk about, and then I'll get into the text of the paper. But I suppose the short version of what I want to talk about is to raise some questions about new materialism as a movement, and to ask some questions about how that might be benefiting us. And I think the short version is, I was reading yesterday and I came across this quite nice quote which said something like, "Science can teach us about life, but it tells us nothing about how we should live our life." And it seems to me that new materialism is in danger of kind of going in a direction that would take them back to the idea that science could teach them about life. So I guess I might formulate this talk as something like, how do we think about what the sciences tell us without letting science tell us what to think? So for example, in Australia, the Australian chief scientist, a guy by the name of Ian Chubb, thought that, and I think he thought he was being kind, but he thought maybe the humanities could rescue itself by providing or acting as a kind of handmaiden to sciences, and helping the sciences to explain to people why the sciences were important, and to help explain what it is that the sciences are actually doing. Which of course is horrific, but more than anything, it's a failure on the part of the humanities to actually specify what it is that we do that is different from the sciences. And I think the other point I would make is that economics is presented to us as a science, as Larry Summers said, it is the only science. But ultimately, economics is a morality, because economics decides and rationalises how people should live and how people should die. And I think it's important for us to take on board that critique. And one of the things I was thinking of whilst Dan was talking is when he defined thought and so forth in terms of problems, is that, so there's Marx's famous quote, which is that man only poses such problems as he can solve. And I guess I wonder whether or not that's the reason why we've done nothing with respect to environmental damage and climate change, because we are yet to pose it as a problem that we can solve. And so therefore it sits on the outer edge of what we can think about and what we can do. And I suppose the other way I would say the short version of this talk is, we can't shop or recycle our way out of environmental damage. It's going to take some major political transformation. Okay, so all great thinkers then, I would suggest, write with only one purpose in mind, which is to make us see something that was hitherto invisible. Thus, Deleuze described his friend Foucault as a seer. His gift, according to Deleuze, was an ability to make us see the intolerable in the midst of that which we accept as norm. And towards the end of his life, he defined philosophy as an ongoing project to create concepts which, in his view, are seeing instruments that exist in a constant and infinite state of surveillance. We must be careful, however, not to confuse the concept with the proposition, he says, or else we risk deluding ourselves of the existence of scientific concepts, that is to say, concepts which can be falsified by appeals to logic and empirical evidence. If one concept is better than an earlier one, Deleuze says, it is because it makes us aware of new variations and unknown resonances, it carries out unforeseen cuttings out, and it brings forth an event that surveys us. Now, interestingly, the original French uses the word survol rather than surveiller, suggesting perhaps that concepts cannot be thought of, could be thought of as drones hovering above us, inspecting us, but in a non-subjective, non-judgmental, and ultimately non-synthetic manner. What, we must ask, did Deleuze want to make us see? Foucault's description of Anti-Oedipus as a guide to non-fascist living offers the beginnings of an answer. It highlights the fact that Deleuze and Guattari were interested in trying to understand and gain insight into two interrelated problematics. both of them as much sociological and anthropological as they are philosophical. Firstly, the age-old problematic of why do people act against their own self-interest, to which I would add that actually Deleuze, at the end of that book, they reject this as a stupid question. Most people kind of forget that part of it. They start by saying, well, you should ask this question, time to get in, and always say it's a bad question. And secondly, the similarly age-old problematic of why do people act violently towards one another. But this is only the beginnings of an answer because it doesn't take into account the much broader range of problematics that Deleuze and Guattari became interested in over the courses of their careers, which, whether they wrote together or not, were nonetheless inextricably combined from their fateful meeting analysis. Now, if we turn to Deleuze's own answers to this question, we get a slightly different picture, one that points to, I think, more fundamental problematics. And there are, I think, three remarks that Deleuze makes. And remember, Deleuze has this nice concept of the vital anecdote. So I think there are three vital anecdotes that we could use to triangulate what Deleuze wants us to see. Firstly, in the wake of Guattari's death in a very, very small eulogy, Deleuze very modestly said that he and Guattari invented the ritornello. And it's interesting that this has been translated as ritornello and as the refrain, but as Eddie Campbell, who is a musicologist, has pointed out, ritornello is not the same as ritornell. Ritornello implies exact repetition, whereas ritornell implies variation. So it's not merely a mistranslation, but it's also a kind of fundamental distortion. So he said that they invented that. And this is important because it gives prominence to a concept that might otherwise seem comparatively slight in an arsenal that includes many more prominent concepts, thereby forcing us to ask why he might want to direct our attention in this way. It is tempting to see it as false modesty, but I don't think it is, because the ritornelle is the organising principle of the assemblage, which, to turn to a second remark, Deleuze said is the concept around which a whole of 1,000 plateaus turns. Somebody asked him, what is the organising principle of the book? He says, I think it's the concept of assemblage. It is the assemblage, he says, that provides the book with the unity of composition. Again, this is surprising because at first glance there seems to be several other candidates with at least a stronger claim. But even this still tells us relatively little, and thus I turn to a third remark. In answer to a question, what is the assemblage? Deleuze rather cryptically said it was a contribution to and an intervention into the study of behaviour. Now, we have to be cautious how we read this because it could be read as positioning their work in continuity with ethology, but I think it would be a mistake to read it this way, because while it is obvious Deleuze and Guattari draw a great deal of inspiration and critical food for thought from the work of Utzkel and Tinbergen and Lawrence and others, it is equally clear that their work departs quite fundamentally from this line of thinking. If we must connect it to ethology, then I think we need to see it as a reinvention of ethology rather than an extinction. One that instigates radical shifting of ground away from an idea of nature dominated by the involuntary promptings of our base instincts. If we don't, then the risk is that we will reduce the assemblage to a biological system, or worse, a set of instincts that governs behaviour in a direct manner, when it seems to me precisely the opposite is at stake. To put it another way, it would not be much of a victory if we broke free of the iron grip of Freud's Oedipal models, only to wind up with the similarly restricted arms of Utzkel, or as interesting and insightful as he is. His work offers only the most marginal of insights into the complexities of human behaviour in the 20th and 21st century. So our challenge today then is to think the assemblage in a non-systemic, non-propositional way, and nonetheless utilise it to analyse the present state of affairs. So I'm interested in the concept of the assemblage, and I want to relate it to a particular kind of problematic. And that problematic has to do with environmental damage and climate change. And I want to specify that because, as the late Christopher Hitchens said, he was a climate change skeptic, but even if you just set that aside, he was right when he said, even if climate change didn't exist as a problem, the pollution that we have already caused would still be a problem. And the risk that we have right now is that we focus on climate change and forget about pollution. But pollution, ultimately climate change is just pollution, right? It's the effect of pollution. So it's important to go back to this question of pollution. And so I want to launch this part of the talk with a brief quote from Guattari's Three Ecologies, where he says, "There is at least a risk that there will be no more human history unless humanity undertakes a radical reconsideration of itself." So there can be few messier or more urgent problems facing the world today than the state of the oceans. And one of the reasons for this, which we don't think about, is the ocean produces more oxygen than all the trees on the planet combined. So if we lose the trees, we might survive. If we lose the ocean, we're fucked. So the ocean, is far more important to us than we ever really give it credit. The last 200 years has seen marine habitats wiped out or transformed beyond recognition. I'm quoting here from History of the Ocean. And with an ever-accelerating tide of human impact, the oceans have changed more in the last 30 years than in all of human history before it. Needless to say that change has been anything but beneficial. Indeed, it has been largely devastating, and the carnage continues. In most places, the oceans have lost upwards of 75% of their megafauna. Large animals such as whales, dolphins, sharks, rays, and turtles, as fishing and hunting has spread in waves across the face of the planet. For some species, numbers are down by as much as 99%, and there are dozens more that have literally disappeared. And that doesn't even begin to cover the full extent of the destruction, because one must also mention algal and jellyfish blooms, acidification, coral bleaching, the appearance of and spread of deoxygenated dead zones, rising water temperatures, and the incredible volume of pollutants and rubbish that have been pumped into the ocean without setting forth for either the present or the future. And yet basically nobody is remarkable. And I won't go back and re-quote what I had in the abstract, but I give you some sort of stats there about the scope of plastic that's in the ocean. The present amount of plastic is sufficient to glad out the entire planet, which is a fairly startling image. Now, assemblage theory, we can see it as a response to the emergence in recent years of problems of this type, which John Law has called messy. So he says, no doubt some things in the world can be made clear and definite, income distributions, global CO2 emissions, the boundaries of nation states, and so on. These are the kinds of provisionally stable realities the social and natural sciences deal with more or less effectively. But alongside such phenomena, the world is textured in quite different ways. Now, unhelpfully, I think, Law tends to collapse all non-definite problems into one order of problem, namely the messy. He says, pains and pleasures, hopes and horrors, intuitions and apprehensions, losses and redemptions, etc., all fall outside of the range of what social science has traditionally been able to capture. Now, he may be right in this, but it doesn't follow that all these examples can and should be thought in the same way, using the same conceptual framework. So we do have to be mindful of the idea and an error of thinking the assemblage is a one-size-fits-all kind of concept. And at the extremes, assemblage theory is fast becoming one assemblage to rule the world. So if, as Deleuze says, we have the philosophy we deserve, according to how well we formulate our problems, then it's important we take the time to think about what kind of a problem it is that we're trying to deal with. Now, as Deleuze once said, a difference, assemblage theory seems to be in the air these days. Its proponents are many and varied, ranging literally across all disciplines from anthropology to urban studies. I recently did a library search to see how many publications there were, and I was looking just the Sage journals, and there was 8,000 journal articles with assemblage in the title. Not all of them refer to assemblage in exactly the same way, but assemblage is used in a variety of ways outside of Deleuze, but nonetheless 8,000 just one publishing place. Accordingly, any and everything, or more precisely, any and every kind of thing has in recent times been called an assemblage. However, this constant and seemingly limitless expansion of the term's range of applications begs the question, if any and every kind of collection of things is an assemblage, then what advantage is there in using this term and not some other kind of term, or indeed no term at all? What makes an assemblage and not some other kind of collection of things? If every apparently random heap of fragments, to use Jameson's suggested phrase, for the randomly heterogeneous and fragmentary and inhalatory, is an assemblage, then the concept serves only to say either that everything is more organised than it appears, or on the contrary, that everything is ultimately less organised than it appears. So either the heap of fragments has a secret order we didn't see, or the apparently ordered totality is really a heap of fragments, if only we looked at it the right way. But either way, it doesn't move as much beyond a highly ambivalent baseline assumption, and we surely have a right to expect more from the concept. So as with so many of Deleuze-Guattari's concepts from the body that orbits to the rhizome, the suggested power of the word itself, coupled with the lack of rigour in both the original conception and more especially in subsequent uptake of it, has meant that assemblage has been put to an incredibly diverse range of uses. And I mean, I realise that it's a kind of odd thing to say, but I think Deleuze and Guattari do have to take some of the blame. They didn't really try to make it a real concept. Let's be clear about that. They kind of came up with a few ideas, threw it out there, and obviously left it for us to figure it out. And probably they never wanted us to turn into a real concept. So that's the other kind of flip side of the problem. But if you read the social sciences, particularly to try to see how they have dealt with the idea of assemblage, there is a definite kind of attempt to turn into a doctrine. Okay? And I think that's very problematic. And in the different pieces of work that I'm doing, I'm trying to look at what they're doing with assemblage to try to critique it. I think the short version is they took on board Masumi's translation of the term as assemblage and then have read that utterly literally. So even though I wouldn't say that Masumi's translation is necessarily wrong, one would say that in hindsight, it's going to be, we'll look back on it and think that it was an unfortunate choice, in the sense that it's being read so literally that people just can't get out of the idea that assemblage must just mean this random collection of things, whereas I don't think that's necessarily what the term means at all. And certainly it's not clear that that's what they want to do. So, what is an assemblage? Well, I think we have to start by saying it is not or cannot be simply a heap of fragments. When the male bowerbird, which is one of Deleuze-Guattari's examples, makes its nest, it piles up twigs and leaves into a heap. But it also arranges them in such a way that the female bowerbird knows that she is being courted. He then stands in front of it, displaying his elegant tail feathers and sings his song. At its simplest then, we can say the assemblage is a purposeful arrangement of matters, the nesting material, as well as affects, namely plumage, and attachments, the mating song. This is why Deleuze-Guattari initially used the term desiring machine to describe the various arrangements they encountered, particularly in the literature on schizophrenia. However, it has to be said the underlying purpose of these arrangements isn't always obvious to the outside observer. So the other problem with assemblage theory is that it tends to think that you can arrive at what the assemblage is by power of observation. And it's not clear to me that Deleuze-Guattari ever thought that was the case. To give you an example, they quote, this is in Anti-Oedipus, where they're quoting Beckett, on being confronted with a complete machine made up of 6 stones in the right-hand pocket of my coat, the pocket that serves as the source of the stones, 5 stones in the right-hand pocket of my trousers, 5 in the left-hand pocket, which is the transmission pocket, with the remaining pocket of my coat receiving the stones that have already been handled. As each of the stones moves forward one pocket, how can we determine the effect of this circular distribution in which the mouth too plays a role as the stone such a machine? There is no observable way that you can say this is what this machine is doing. So, I mean, that's the problem for social science. They seem to think they can look at the machine and figure out what the machine is doing by observation alone, and it seemed clear to me that Deleuze-Guattari would reject that as being wrong. The purpose of the arrangement may not even be obvious to the person whose assemblage it is. And one of the other things that's, I think, important to think about with respect to assemblage is that for Deleuze-Guattari it has to do with notions of voluntary and involuntary. It goes back to the idea of complex. If you have an eatable complex, you have an eatable assemblage. The eatable complex is not voluntary in the strict sense. The purpose of this arrangement, as I said, may not be obvious to the person whose assemblage it is, but they nevertheless know that the particular arrangement they have contrived is necessary to them, inasmuch as they cannot conceive of living without it.
So Beckelheim's patient little Joey insisted that he could live, eat, defecate and sleep only if he was plugged into machines provided with motors, wires, lights, carburetors, propellers, steering wheels, an electrical feeding machine, a car machine that enabled him to breathe, and an anal machine that lights up. And this is also for anal. Joey fashioned these machines for himself from found materials, aluminium foil, paper plates, and so on. But when these materials were taken off him in a bid to wean off his machines, he persisted with his rituals of plugging in machines that were no longer there. He did not need the props to make his machines work, because the machines themselves consist only of relations, and these relations are independent of the materials that are meant. This is not to say that the specificity of materials is unimportant to assemblages, because that is obviously not the case. But it is to say that it is the modality of the set of relations to materials that should be of primary interest to us, because it is relations, not the materials, that actually constitute the assemblage. Without those relations, the bowerbird's pile of nest building materials is literally indistinguishable from a heap of fragments. The relations can be mapped, and in reality it is this map that constitutes the assemblage, not the heap of fragments that ultimately materialise. Now, new materialism as a philosophical movement that has arisen on the periphery of Deleuze studies makes the mistake, in my view, of focusing on the heap of fragments, seeing its matter as the central concern of inquiry, rather than the modalities of relations binding those fragments. And this gives rise to some problematic moves, particularly in ethics, which is what I will talk here. Now, in the opening pages of Vibrant Matter, Jane Bennett sets the scene for her discussion of what she calls vital materialism, with a vital anecdote of her own, about a random and randomly encountered assortment of rubbish, which she describes as an assemblage. So I'll just briefly quote from her. She says, "On a sunny Tuesday morning on the 4th of June, in the great opal storm-drained Chesapeake Bay, in front of Sam's Bagels on Cold Spring Lane, Baltimore, there was," and she lists, "one large men's black plastic work glove, one dense mat of oak pollen, one unblemished dead rat, one white plastic bottle cap, one smooth stick of wood. Glove, pollen, rat, cap, stick." I'm still quoting her. She says, "As I encountered these items, they shimmied back and forth between debris and thing, between, on the one hand, stuff to ignore, except insofar as it betokened human activity, the workman's effort, the litterer's cost, the rat poisoner's success, and on the other hand, stuff that commanded attention in its own right, as existence in excess of their association with human meanings, habits, or pleasures." She goes on to say that the debris caught her eye in the way that it did, and I'm still quoting here, because of the contingent tableau that they formed with each other, with the street, with the weather that morning, with me. For had the sun not glinted on the black glove, I might not have seen the rat. Had the rat not been there, I might not have noted the little bottle cap, and so on. In this assemblage, objects appeared as things, that is, as vivid entities, not entirely reduced to the context in which human substance is set." End quote. Now, unfortunately, she does not say anything more here about the nature of the relationship between these items and the street or the weather or indeed itself, save the way that they caught her eye. In point of fact, the only reason she thinks of these items as an assemblage is because her glance happened to take them in all at once. Bennett attributes her perception of these objects to a happy combination of her own perceptual openness and what she calls the thing power of the objects themselves. So the concept of thing power is to me a somewhat surreal sounding idea. It is said to call to mind a childhood sense of the world as filled with, I'm quoting Bennett again, filled with all sorts of animate beings, some human, some not, some organic, some not. It draws attention to an efficacy of objects in excess of the human meaning designed for purposes that they express or serve. End of quote. So ultimately, Bennett is struck by the materiality of the objects and experiences an epiphany of sorts to the effect that, as she puts it, it hit her in a visceral way how American materialism, which requires buying ever-increasing numbers of products purchased in ever shorter cycles is a kind of anti-materiality. End of quote. So her point is that as a planet, we consume as though our consumption is immaculate and does not produce waste. We delude ourselves into thinking that when we throw trash in the bin, it is somehow thereby taken care of, and we don't give a second thought to the eventual resting place of that trash. Not only that, we tend to think of trash as simply a natural outcome of human existence. Life inevitably begets rubbish. Therefore, we are not really obliged to think about it any more than we think about the many other facets of human existence that in the first world at least we assume we are entitled to and tend to take for granted. The air we breathe, the water we drink, the sunshine on our backs, the ground beneath our feet. We assume all those things will be life-giving and safe, but the reality is that our disregard for what happens to our trash is jeopardising our existence to the point where, as Paul Aurelio so eminently put it, one day the day will come when the day won't come. So Bennett's work raises several questions, besides the question of whether or not a contingent tabloid can actually be assembled. To begin with, there is the idea of thing power itself, which strikes me as an oddly inert conception of power, inasmuch as it does little more than call attention to itself, and even then, only when our perceptual apparatus is properly primed to notice. If thing power depends on our perceptual priming, then it is hard to see how one can maintain the idea that it is in fact power. By the same token, if we only notice things because they have thing power, then what must be said of all the things we do not notice? Are they without thing power? If so, who decides? Is it in the eye of the beholder? Can powerless things acquire thing power on their own? Or does it require a preceding subject to bestow it? Now, even if we set aside these, and I think they're quite strong criticisms of thing power, it is still hard to see what actual purpose it serves in a critical sense. Because all it seems to do is point out in a very conditional way to a process by which we become aware of the thing's existence. Given this rather banal function, it is somewhat surprising to find that for Bennett, thing power is the central plank in the ethics of what she calls vital materialism. Ethics, she says, and I'm quoting here, begins with the recognition of human participation in a shared vital materiality. We are vital materiality and we are surrounded by it, though we do not always see it that way. The ethical task at hand here is to cultivate the ability to discern non-human vitality to become perceptually open to it. The ethical significance of the perceptual openness and heightened awareness and non-human vitality that Bennett calls for here is debatable, I think, because there is no clear link in her thinking between awareness and action. And this, for me, is one of the crucial problems of contemporary life, because we have never been more aware of the problems facing us, and seemingly never been doing less to deal with them. And there's several commentators who pointed out, particularly with respect to social media, raising awareness is not by itself either an ethical or a political act, because it does not entail any specific form of action. I mean, there can be few people in the well-informed first world who are not aware of such major issues as climate change, the steady destruction of Earth's habitat, from the Amazon rainforest to the sea, yet little or nothing is being done or even being demanded to change the situation. Now, this is not to dismiss the occasional victories against this or that development, whether it's a pipeline or a new coal mine, but it is to say these campaigns are still a long way short of the general uprising that is probably required to change everything as not behind for. Even if one concedes awareness is a necessary precursor to action, it is not the same thing as saying it is a sufficient cause of action. Now, interestingly, Bennett herself seems rather unsure of what vital materialism's ethics in fact is, because everywhere else in her book she says, in a really sort of tentative way, that perhaps the ethical responsibility of an individual human now resides in one's response to the assemblages in which one finds oneself participating. Now, to me, this is even less satisfactory than the previous formulation, because all this amounts to saying is that perhaps one ought to look out for oneself. So the key question for me then is, what does Bennett mean by participating when she says the ethical responsibility of an individual human now resides in one's response to the assemblages in which one finds oneself participating? Because it seems to me to suggest that the assemblage is always somehow pre-given, an existing arrangement of things that one enters and responds to, like a player in a virtual reality game such as Set Online. Now, Bennett's political sympathies are clearly reformist, not revolutionary. She can envisage changing things and upsetting the status quo, but not overturning everything and starting again, as some more radical environmental thinkers like Nunn and Klein clearly demand. And this is made clear at the start of her book, and in the previous book, Championing Modern Life, in which Bennett wrote that she believes that, and I'm quoting again, a modified organisation of commodification and advertising could respond to the structural injustices in the existing patterns of consumption, which she acknowledges includes the production of waste, without seeking to eliminate the enchanting effects of commodities. And she says it is the form of commodification, not the fact of it, that is the problem. I mean, any Marxist in the room scratching their head at this point. Her rationale, which she says she shares with those with courage, is that commodity capitalism is not the totalising power it is said to be by its critics and defenders alike, and that within it there is always a positive ethical potential that we can exploit in order to move in a direction more in tune with the needs of environmental sustainability and what might be termed social justice. And with all due respect to Jane, I think that's nonsense. There is just absolutely no evidence that we can reform our way of practice. The idea that there is such a thing as an ethical form of capitalism is surely the most pernicious of all the social and political fantasies circulated today, because it obscures the most basic of Marx's lessons, namely that capitalism is inherently exploitative, inasmuch as the employers always derive far greater benefit from labour than the people who perform that labour. There is no way round this basic fact. Inequality is the engine that drives the machine of capitalism, and false consciousness is what prevents us from seeing this. Now, there's a much more sophisticated version of that argument, but basically, what I'm saying is capitalism is exploitative. The fact that we can't see this is due to, among other things, false consciousness, but there are other reasons as well. To which we must add, and I think this is really crucial, David Harvey's insight that contemporary capitalism derives its profits by externalising its costs. It doesn't pay a full or fair price for the resources it extracts. It doesn't pay a full or fair price for the infrastructure it relies on, for its business, roads, railways, and so on. And it doesn't pay a full price for waste it produces. And as David Harvey puts it, it's easy to get rich when you get to sell something you didn't pay for. And that's how this, the resources industry works. Basically, you dig a hole in the ground and you sell off rocks that you never paid for. And these are old lessons, to be sure, but as Naomi Klein's recent writing on climate change makes clear, they remain fresh and relevant as ever, basically because we haven't followed to learn a lesson. As she puts it, ours is a culture of disavowal, of simultaneously knowing and not knowing. The illusion of proximity coupled with the reality of distance is the trick affected by the fossil fuel market. So we both know and don't know who makes our goods, who cleans up after us, where our waste disappears to, whether it's our sewage or carbon emissions. So if the ethical task is to respond to the assemblage we are participating in, then that surely means we have to start with the assemblage we are all participating in, namely the planet as a habitable space. What does responsibility entail in this context? On big questions like this, vital materialism ethics is, I think, anemic to say the least. If things have thin power, why don't these things awaken any ethical feeling of responsibility? Indeed, why don't they awaken any feelings at all? Awareness is not a feeling. It may be a precursor to a feeling, but by itself it is a blank, nothing more than a general preparedness to feel. And one can see this in the way Bennett speaks about their awareness of objects encountered in Cold Spring Lane. What I find most frustrating about Bennett's encounter with rubbish in Cold Spring Lane is the complete absence of any discussion of ethical implications of the fact that what she encounters is perceived as rubbish. By which I mean she says nothing about the fact that the items are perceived as not only being without any value in themselves, but as having no possible value in the future for any possible further use. They are simply there, and one expects nothing of them, neither to remain nor to disappear. In describing the items as debris, she explicitly frames them as the byproduct of some kind of destructive episode that drained them of value. And though she attempts to recall some of the processes that might have led to the items being there, she does not thereby endow them with any value. They remain a heap of fragments. And while she offers an oblique acknowledgement that contemporary consumer culture is the frame for this people practice, in which one has to situate an impossible discussion of these objects, she does not make the obvious connection that as a participant in consumer culture, however conscientiously, she is nonetheless a cog in the machine sustained, which she refers to as materialism. So the unasked ethical question here is this: are we responsible for the rubbish we encounter? For those of us who are teachers here, I can tell you it's a really great tutorial topic. Get your students to think about rubbish and ask them how responsible they feel for their rubbish, where their responsibility begins and ends. Most of them will tell you that as far as they're concerned, they'll put it in the bin, that's it, they're done. And then if you ask the question, how far would they be prepared to walk to put their rubbish into the bin if it's guaranteed to be recycled, the answer is surprisingly small. Some of my students are really kind of conscientious and thought that they would maybe walk 50 metres to guarantee their rubbish was recycled. But many of them are kind of like, no, we wouldn't walk that far. So Bennett's vital materialist ethics would suggest that we are responsible for the rubbish we encounter. However, she does not specify what that responsibility entails. To that end, I want to suggest that although Judith Butler's project is quite different from Bennett's, it is nonetheless useful to read it alongside hers, because Butler's conception of ethics also turns on the power of things to capture our attention. But in contrast to Bennett, she prioritises the living and she attaches action to awareness. So Butler writes, if certain lives are not perceivable as lives, and this includes sentient beings who are not human, then the moral prohibition against violence will only be selectively applied, and our own sentience will only be selectively mobilised. The critique of violence must begin with the question of the representability of life itself. What allows a life to become visible in its precariousness and its need for shelter? What is it that keeps us from seeing or understanding certain lives in this way? Now, consistent with the vital materialist way of seeing things, Butler's ethics places the onus on the perceived object to awaken and perceive an ethical sense of responsibility and obligation to act. I still think this is problematic. The difference is that the ethical task for Butler does not stop with merely opening oneself to an awareness of non-human vitality, but also insists that an awareness of any form of vitality must also entail the taking on a responsibility toward that vitality and a general acceptance that all forms of life are inherently precarious and require care. The ethical task is thrust upon us, unbidden from a nameless elsewhere, interrupting the normal course of our lives, she writes, binding us to act in spite of ourselves. So Butler's name for this feeling is grief. But we may generalise and simply say it is a mode of ethics that the world demands of us the moment we perceive that some part of it needs us. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you paid any kind of attention to what's happening in the ocean, you would recognise that the ocean needs us now. And that the awareness of that must entail an imperative to act, otherwise there is no ethics. Today, only the ignorant and the stupid can fail to see that the environment has entered at such a state of precarity that it demands not only our urgent attention, but also our equally urgent change of behaviour. It is no exaggeration to say that today the ocean needs us, particularly when it comes to the already insurmountable, instead of worsening problem of rubbish, where the scale of the problem has grown so large it is difficult to conceptualise, let alone comprehend. For instance, the Gaia in the Northeast Pacific is now known as the Great Eastern Garbage Patch. It has become an enormous meshwork of flotsam, mostly plastic, the size of Texas. Just like the mats of floating seaweed that so amaze the sailors of the old, great rafts of plastic fishing line, nets, ropes, and thousands of other little junks have accumulated in the Gaia. This cesspool of waste spells death to the marine creatures forced to try to live in its midst. Closer to shore, the problem is just as great, but the land-based rubbish is undoubtedly more visible than the rubbish trade guys in the Pacific. And again, the scale of the problem is virtually impossible to conceptualise. Just to give you one example, in 2001, a survey of the beach in California, Orange County, had estimated that there was 150,000 items of visible rubbish for every 1 kilometre of beach. For the county as a whole, this was estimated to amount to over 100 million pieces of rubbish. It's just on the beaches. But this is barely a tip of the proverbial iceberg. So I guess that kind of could enumerate further and further on just how disastrous the ocean is. But I want to just kind of end on this note. It seems to me that Bennett's insisting on the randomness of both the encounter and the things encountered functions as an explanation and alibi for the fact that neither the encounter nor the things encountered excite any kind of response from her. She's unmoved by the death of the rat, and she's uninterested in the sources of the items she finds with the rat, because she does not think of herself as either the cause of the objects being there where they are, or responsible before the objects that she encounters. So for me, if the assemblage means anything for us as a way of thinking about the contemporary world, it must mean a recognition that we are part of the assemblage, and therefore responsible for and be for